Hello and welcome to the June 12th edition of the Bubb Report. Last week, the two main political parties in Grenada continued to sharpen their messages to the electorate ahead of the June 23rd poll. Both parties have placed the Grenadian worker at the focal point of their messaging strategies, with the NDC committing to pay pension owed to public servants, as well as regularizing temporary contract workers in the public service. For the incumbents' part, their surrogates have also given a commitment that the party would pay pensions if re-elected into government, though no rebuttals were offered with respect to the state of temporary workers in the service.
That change, and that remind me, I think of that fellow in Trinidad that sing dollar wine. They want that dollar wine, they want small change, but we give them a big change, and the big change is changing your lives for the better, and that is what the new National Party has done.
Not to be left out of the election conversation, some of the public sector unions have been front and center advocating for their membership. On the part of the Public Workers Union, they have gone to bat for the workers in the service who are yet to be regularized, and has accused the incumbent administration in Grenada of wanting to destroy the security of tenure in the public service.
Do not, I want to repeat, do not take any declarations on the political platform as fact to make yourself comfortable in the payment of pension. The government has not dealt with us judiciously. They have not written to us on this matter to say when they are going to start paying. So these are just, for lack of a better terminology, it escapes me now, I would say it's politics at this point in time.
Meanwhile, they are collecting salaries, they are collecting pensions, they are collecting gratuities across government ministries right now. In accounts departments, our workers, public workers, are working feverishly to prepare gratuities for every politician save.
This week on our program, we discuss how labor and employment issues are animating the 2022 election campaign, with a panel that includes two former active trade unionists, and ask whether or not these issues will have an impact on how voters vote in under 2 weeks. Also on the report, we sit with a representative of the Royal Grenada Police Force to discuss law and order issues around Election Day. Last week, the opposition NDC reported being the victim of political intimidation in the town of St. George, with bottles being hurled at its candidate, Claudette Joseph. We welcome our guests, NNP activist and former trade unionist Chester Humphrey, NDC activist and former trade unionist Elliot Bishop, the former Member of Parliament for St. Patrick West, Kenny Lal Singh, and ASP Simon Douglas of the Royal Grenada Police Force. We thank you for joining us. A pleasant good morning to our viewers and listeners, and we welcome you to yet another edition of the Bubb Report. Now, the Bubb Report is being streamed at 10 a.m. this week in order to facilitate the hectic schedules of two of our panel guests who are part of the two main political parties in Grenada. And today there is a packed series of political activities that are being held on behalf of both parties. And so we're happy that we're able to accommodate them at this time. We are having some technical issues and technical difficulties with getting Mr. Bishop on the program. That's Mr. Elliot Bishop of the National Democratic Congress. But we will certainly keep trying to ensure that we can have him on for the program. But at this time, I wish to welcome our two guests, no strangers to the Bubb Report. I have Senator Chester Humphrey. If we were to go by his full government name, it would be Senator Chester Arlington Arthur Humphrey. So Senator Humphrey, we welcome you back to the Bubb Report, as well as Mr. Kenny Lal Singh, a former Member of Parliament for the St. Patrick West constituency, in addition to a former government minister under both the NNP and the NDC administration. And we will see if we can get Mr. Bishop. Mr. Bishop, if you can hear us, we would also introduce you to the program as well. We can't see anything on your screen as yet, but please, if you can't hear, are you able to hear us, Mr. Bishop? I don't think Mr. Bishop can hear us just yet. So both Mr. Humphrey and Mr. Lal Singh, welcome to the report. Mr. Lal Singh, I will start with you. What would you say are your own observations with respect to how this particular election campaign is unfolding? Is it unfolding in a manner that have come to be expected of conventional election campaigns in Grenada?
Good morning to Dr. Bob and the listeners. The election is like all other elections. It's the rivalry between both parties. But of course, a little background. Besides election, I look forward to governance. And I would like to, and always have articulated, that I look forward to a government that has serious planning for economic and infrastructure development, and not just collecting revenue and spending revenue. Both parties are presenting their positions. Both parties are going for the kill to see if they can win the next election. Now, the NNP is a very prominent organization, well-oiled and well-organized. They're no fly-by-night party. So they do have very good structures in place. Unlike the NDC, it's a bunch of new people to politics. And they are still trying to get their feet on the ground, so as to be able to articulate and advance their position on various issues. Now, the people in Grenada are looking at the issues. What are the issues? Because this is what the people are expected to vote for. What are your programs if you happen to win elections? So I think what is happening there, you have a lot of people now, the electorate is thinking, who should I vote for? In place. Various comments. There are people who looking for a party that is experienced, young and old, and that is where the NNP fits in. The NDC, they're all new. And to some people, this is posing a difficulty for them.
Now, Mr. Lal Singh, Mr. William Joseph, who was a former a strategist for the National Democratic Congress, his theory of the case is that this new NDC perhaps reflects the spirit and tenor of the NDC of 2003, when they also had an infusion of new blood at the time. And that infusion of new blood gave them a particular energy, and it gave the population an impetus to look at them as a viable alternative. What say you with respect to that theory of the case?
Well, it's not exactly correct, because you had Tillman Thomas as the prime minister. And
well, he was a political leader. He was not the prime. We're talking
right.
2003 before they won the election.
2003, yes. He was a political leader, and then he became the leader of the opposition. Mm-hmm. But of course, Mr. Thomas spent some years in government, sometimes as parliamentary secretary, sometimes as minister. So we expect him to have had some kind of experience, unlike what is happening now. And I tell you, you don't learn the politics overnight. You don't learn the government overnight. It takes time.
All right, Mr. Lal Singh, thank you. Mr. Bishop, Mr. Elliot Bishop of the NDC, Mr. Brian Grimes, we do have an opposition representative here. His name is Elliot Bishop, who is a member of the National Democratic Congress. and we also have Mr. Chester Humphrey, who is a member of the New National Party. So both parties are represented here to respond to Mr. Brian Grimes. Mr. Bishop, can you hear us now?
Yes, I'm hearing you clearly.
And we can also see you well. Mr. Elliot Bishop of the National Democratic Congress, welcome to the program. And we also have your former colleague here, Senator Chester Humphrey. Both of you struggled in the labor movements together. Mr. Bishop, you worked with the Commercial and Industrial Workers
Commercial and Industrial Workers Union.
CIWU. I do remember when I was a member of TAU, when we marched on Labor Day. At that time, Senator was my union leader at the time at GBN and Channel 6. But Mr. Bishop, I want to ask both yourself and Senator Humphrey this question. And this question has to do with issues related to the Grenadian worker. Issues related to the Grenadian worker are taking prominence in this election campaign. Both the NDC and the NNP are committing to paying pensions. In the case of the National Democratic Congress, you are attempting to regularize workers who are considered temporary. Mr. Bishop, would you say that that is a winning strategy for you, that message is having resonance with the population?
I think that the response from on the ground seems to be very positive as it relates to, well, paying of the pension, yes, and also the contract labor, to remove that so that we don't have this arrangement within the voting population, because it is in fact a violation. The labor code makes a reference to three forms of contract. You have a contract for a specific time, you have a contract for a specific task, right? And then there's a contract for an unspecified period of time. And it is very clear that organizing a contract for a year or so is a violation of that provision within the labor code. So I think that the indication by NDC to remove that is very positive, and workers are really responding positive to that. Yes, that is so. As it relates, I just want to comment on the question of the pension. NDC is saying, without any doubt, that they would pay the pension. I'm surprised now to hear that the NNP are also making comments in that direction. But the Prime Minister was very clear in his position that he can't pay. The government can't pay because of the amount that is supposed to be paid. But our party is saying that it could be done. So frankly, the response from workers as it relates to that issue on the ground is very positive.
Okay. Senator Humphrey, what say you? You've heard Mr. Bishop's theory of the case here, that the NDC is saying that their commitments to workers, whether that is paying the pension in a sufficiently adequate deadline, as well as regularizing workers. Of course, your party has been accused by the labor movement of attempting to really hollow out security of tenure in the public service. So let's get your view on this.
Well, let me just go back a bit. In my initial engagement, to clarify one thing, you did introduce me as representing the NNP, and let me clarify that. Okay. I'm on this program here as Chester Humphrey.
In your individual capacity.
I'm not on this program here representing the New National Party. Of course, my views will accord with theirs, and of course, I'm a member of the New National Party, and that goes without saying. I also want to address an earlier.
Yes. Go ahead.
No, because when you invited me here as Senator Humphrey. You didn't, in fact, you couldn't invite me here as the New National Party, because you would have had to send that invitation to the party, and the party may then have designated me or you could have made a request to the party that you wanted me to represent their views. So just let's be clear on this. I'm not here representing the New National Party.
So you are here representing Chester Humphrey?
Although I can assure you that 99.9%, if not all of my views, will form concord with the views of the party. But I just thought I should make this clear so that we understand what we are doing.
We understand. Absolutely.
Good. The other point is, I don't want to be in a disjointed discussion. We have Mr. Kedilal Singh here, a very prominent and successful Grenadian businessman, and you had put certain questions to him related to age and other things like that. And therefore, in my contribution, I would like a certain amount of concord to take place and not us have a disjointed program jumping all over the place. So I want to backtrack a bit before I come to the question that you posed to Elliot and myself. And to say first and foremost, I do not respect William Joseph as any kind of significant analyst. He claims he's a strategist, but if the taste of the pudding is in the eating, in every strategy he has led, it has led to ultimate failure. Because I place squarely in his hands significantly the collapse of the National Democratic Congress in power in between the period 2008 and 2013. And I will leave that there. If you want to resurrect discussions on that, I could come to that. But as a backdrop to this discussion, I am not affording Mr. Joseph any significance whatsoever in these discussions as a backdrop to an analysis of currently what's happening. Now, let me go to the pension issue because there seemed to be a fair degree of confusion, I would think, and I need to clear that up. The pension issue, which is anchored and centered around the Pension Disqualification Act of 1983, which the PRG introduced in an attempt to establish a universal pension, is the problem that we're trying to address now, right? In those days of, well, I don't want to go into that historical detail because time does not afford us. So let's be clear on that. And I'm saying to you that the New National Party under Dr. Mitchell has had a consistent program of attempting to address this issue. The special pension, which came about in 2002, which was patterned upon the collective agreement that the Technical and Allied Workers Union had negotiated and signed by myself for the daily paid workers in the then, well, not civil service, because the daily paid, strictly speaking, are not within the civil service, but within the employ of the state, because the state has different categories of employees. It has what you call the traditional civil servant, and that civil servant held an instrument from the Crown appointing him to the post, and the Crown operates through that instrument called the Public Service Commission. So let us be clear, the pensions of which we are now talking as pensions based on the instrument issued by the Public Service Commission. It is not a pension for every Tom, Dick, and Harry. And I'm saying the genesis of the problem which we face now went back to the Pension Disqualification Act. I don't want to spend much time on that because that has its own dynamics and we won't have time to afford it. Now, the first mass, and I'm not talking, there were two constitutional motions brought before the Constitutional Court. One brought by Derek Knight in the case of the gentleman's name is slipping me now. The other one brought by McQueen. That is when in 1995 or 1996, somewhere thereabout, McQueen was the local government commissioner. His post was then abolished. I think then by the then NNP in office, his post was abolished, and he was given what was then described as a golden handshake. You remember US aid, in an attempt to trim the public service and to make it more manageable and to accord it the international benchmarks which existed, provided the then Herbert Blaise administration with a significant sum of money to pay people off. So when McQueen was terminated, his post was abolished for purposes of reorganization. They paid him the golden handshake. He went to the Constitutional Court and argued that I am entitled to be treated in accordance with the Constitution, meaning that if my post is abolished for purpose of reorganization, I must not be given any golden handshake. I must be treated as though I'd reached the retirement age. And the only law in place at the time, because there was a defect in the National Insurance Scheme Act, the only law in place at the time was the 1958 Colonial Act, which deals with pensions. And I want to emphasize that our Constitution does not give you a pension, but it gives you a right to a pension. The 1958 Act is the act you have to go to determine what actual pension you would get. There was, so that's the two primary cases. When I was still president of the Technical and Allied Workers Union, vice president of the TUC, and general secretary of the Caribbean Congress of Labor, we brought another case before the Constitutional Court. And I can tell you, since 1986, and Elliot could confirm this, I had been pressing for us to go to the Constitutional Court, right? But it only came about somewhere in 2009 or 2010, yes, when we were able to get Mrs. Armstrong to go to that case. We took then the three unions that were involved. It was TAU, public workers, and teachers. The other two, well, they are trade unions in a form. I'm talking about the Association for Non-Commissioned Officers, both in the prison and in the police. The associations did not have the money. So the Technical and Allied Workers Union, under my leadership, although we had very few people as beneficiaries, decided that we will contribute 1/3 of the cost. And we took Dr. Francis Alexis as the lead counsel, supported by Jimmy Bristol, and went to the Constitutional Court. And we won that case for Ms. Hermelyn Armstrong before that justice from Trinidad. Her name is going to come to me in a minute. You have to excuse me. I'm contending with the rain. It's raining very heavily here, and you know what happens when rain falls on galvanized. So I have to shout to make sure that you're hearing me.
Yes, yes, Senator. Yes, no. in the interest of time.
In the interest of time, very shortly. That case was returned in favor of Armstrong and others, but there were several of them not beneficiaries. And during that time, every attempt to meet the Prime Minister, the Minister of Finance then, failed. The National Democratic Congress never met the trade union movement on the issue of the Armstrong case, right? I want to point out to you, and they had ample opportunity of implementing the payments of the case. They never did. The government that made it abundantly clear that it was accepting the judgment in the Armstrong, the Price Finley judgment, it was not appealing it, and it was paying the workers, was the new National Party. The new National Party, when it returned to office in 2013, in a case which judgment came sometime in 2011 or 2012, subject to the correction, they paid that judgment, and they paid it fully in accordance with the decisions of the court. So let's be clear on that. So
let me bring in Mr. Bishop here. Mr. Bishop, Senator Humphrey's case here is that the incumbent has always made true on the commitments with respect to pensions for workers. Your thoughts, Mr. Bishop?
Well, one would have thought, if that is in line with what Brother Chester is saying, or Senator Chester is saying, there's a ruling by the court that the workers must be paid the pension. So those issues that he's alluding to is not really related to what is the situation as it stands right now. I think that we should talk about how these payments should be made to workers. We can't go back and say, well, the NDC didn't do this and the NNP did that. That is not going to solve the question of the payment of the workers' pension. So we have to start talking about how it should be done. And I think the NDC leader, Brother Deacon Mitchell, has made it quite clear that an NDC government will work towards honoring the court decision and paying the workers a pension. So I think that we should really discuss among that and not really going back about what was done. The issue is payment of the pension at this time.
Okay, so moving forward, I think the incumbent they have accused the NDC of pie in the sky promises to the Grenadian people. In other words, they're not too sure what your methodology looks like with how you are going to make those payments and how you're going to regularize workers. So when you sit with your team, what say you with respect to that counter argument?
Well, as a trade union, as a trade unionist, I think that the approach ought to be dialogue with governments and the labor unions that are involved, right? And we start from there. I think that the NDC are not disclosing all the facts as it relates to how they would pay for reasons. I think that they really doesn't want the incumbent, right, to get some of the ideas. But I think that it is quite it's a court action, it's a court decision, and any government in office ought to find a way to pay the pension, and that is exactly what the NDC is saying. We wouldn't go down in the detail as
let me bring in Mr. Lalsing, and then Senator, I'm going to bring you back. Mr. Lalsing, let's get your thoughts on that particular issue that is animating the campaign with respect to pension and payments with respect to security of tenure of the workers. When you hear the narrative from both parties, what goes through your mind?
I'm very clear that the pension issue should be settled. I don't believe the pension is a difficult thing to pay, but the longer it's prolonged, the more difficult it becomes. So we have wasted a lot of time, and we still continue to waste time talking about the pension. Now, the Prime Minister in a national address said that he has established a high-level committee, and they will report to him in 90 days on the findings and recommendations. Meanwhile, the NDC have pronounced that they will pay the pension. They did not give full details. Now, that promise by the National Democratic Congress has baffled the Prime Minister. And he, in the rally in St. David's over a week ago, made it very clear that he will pay the pension. So it means that the Prime Minister is reacting to the promise of the National Democratic Congress offer to pay the pension. The big question here is, Dr. Bubb, the promise that the Prime Minister made, political leader in St. David's, that he will pay the pension, is it the high-level committee report that he reported on? He didn't say. Or is it a campaign promise because he's on the back foot where the pension issue is concerned? I think the Prime Minister needs to clear this matter up. Is your promise part of the high-level committee report? Or is it you want to win the election? So because the NDC has promised to pay pension, you now promising. So I think it's difficult to believe in the NNP about the pension payments, because he only is saying so because the NDC has promised. And I think we, as political leaders and parties, we need to come clean with the people and make it very clear what you're going to do, how you are going to do it. So the people are very concerned, they're confused. Of course, I think the pension issue has put the National Democratic Congress in a very, very good position because they did not waffle about it. They made it very clear that they will pay. And I think, quite frankly, they can pay. I don't think the pension is too difficult to pay. We have to pay it, and we need to pay it. But I think I would like the Prime Minister to say whether his promise of paying is a report from the so-called high-level committee or not.
And I believe they did have 90 days. So let me bring in Senator. Let me bring in you here. I know that you
Dr.
have
Bubb, Dr. Bubb,
yes. Please proceed.
I need to be clear on the procedure that we're using here, because you cut me off before I could say what I have to say. You gave one participant 2 bites of the cherry.
Well, Senator, that's why
what I'm asking, is this an interactive program, or is this? I just need to find out what the format
No.
is.
It is an interactive program, and in the interest of time,
I've been heralding you that I was not finished. Because
I did not. Yes.
Because I'm saying to you, Mr. Lal Singh has said that the questions concerning the purity of intention, and I'm saying to you, on the basis of historic fact, the New National Party under this administration paid the full judgment that came on the pension issue with the Armstrong case. In this case, it's quite a large sum of money. The government has said it will not appeal the case. It will pay the pension, but it needed to find out, first and foremost, the size of the commitment, how many people involved, a number of people have died, and how that will be paid, and from where the money will be sourced. But they went further, and this had nothing to do with the statement made by the National Democratic Congress. They went further to say precisely the point that Mr. Lal Singh is making, that rather than keep perpetuating this thing into the future, we have decided that we are going to make a break, and that this problem will not continue into the future. And so effective from the 1st of January this year, any public officer here means an officer in the service of the Crown, appointed through an instrument of the Public Service Commission, any such officer who is entitled to a pension and retires with effect from the 1st of this year will be paid both the pension and the gratuity. So there is no perpetuation of the problem into the future. So any person who retires this year, who otherwise did not receive the pension and gratuity, can write to the Auditor General,
the Accountant General.
No, it's not the Auditor General. In the public service, the name is you're going to come to me as they would normally write. Right? That because you have to determine whether you want your full pension or you want a pension payment. And I want to deal with this gratuity thing, because there's no such, while it is called gratuity, it's a misnomer. What you are getting is a reduced pension in the form of a non-interest bearing loan. You get 25% of your pension, which you would have earned upfront, and you pay that back monthly by monthly installments over 12 and a half years. So that you have to indicate to the Director General, I think it is, or the Auditor General, how you want your pension, whether you want your full pension or you want a reduced pension with what this thing called a gratuity. And if you do that this year, you will receive that. So we want to make the point very clear. What the committee is advising on is the committee is making a determination on the size, because this will amount to a significant part of the recurrent budget in any year. The NDC has said that they would borrow the money and they would pay. That is one format. But remember, they have 2 portions of this thing. You have to pay what we in the trade union movement call the retroactive, but you also have to pay the ongoing recurrent, because when you pay off the retroactive, that is people who did not receive the gratuity, who did not receive the pension. And remember, that money right now, there's an estimate that it probably might be $500 million. But remember, this attracts statutory interest of 6% per year. So it's a sizable sum of money, Mr. Lal Singh, not to be treated lightly. Because remember, the state has other things to do. The state has other commitments to make. The state machinery has to run. Right? So you have to budget this thing carefully. And this is why that committee was set up. Then there are a number of other questions that need to be answered, right? There are people who have died, which estate you're going to pay, how you're going to pay it, if you're going to pay everybody one time or you're going to pay them sequentially. Are you going to just pay? All right, so you would have restored pensions when people start getting the pensions. I said those who retired this year. But for those who are backlogged and have not been paid, how many of them would you bring on to the pensionable establishment? What would be the size of the annual pension allocation to include all of these people? So it is not a trivial matter. And this is what the government has set up the committee to do. And the committee is still doing that work, and it will report to the cabinet. And at some stage, the cabinet will make a decision. If by some miracle,
assuming that the incumbent cabinet would be returned into office.
That's what I'm about to say. If by some miracle that does not happen, any new incoming cabinet, including if this government is returned, will have to sit down and work out. Now remember, the government invited the unions to discuss the issue. We wrote in 2011, 2012 to the Tillman Thomas government, asking them to meet us as unions. Up to this day, no meeting was held. Up to this day, the NDC, and I'm saying, judge them not by the old talk, but judge them by their conduct. And how do you judge by conduct? By reference to past conduct. And I'm saying in past conduct, the Hermelin-Armstrong judgment came in while the National Democratic Congress was in power. I was then the leader of the Technical and Allied Workers Union, the first vice president of the TUC, and I was a major part of the triumphant group that has been leading negotiations for public officers. And I'm saying,
right,
compare
Senator,
that then to what is happening now. And this is why I'm saying there is sufficient confidence based on practice to accept the word of the new National Party on the issue of pensions.
All right, let me bring in Mr. Bishop here. Mr. Bishop, you've heard a lot from Mr. Lal Singh, and you've also heard from your comrade here, former trade union colleague. Anything else you wish to add before we move on to the question of the regularization of workers in the service, Mr. Bishop?
I think the point made by Mr. Lal Singh is very clear, and the kind of thing that the voters would want to respond to. The statement by the Prime Minister is really a response to the NDC promise. And workers have had several experiences of promises made by the NNP party on the platform. So I don't think that they would really put much trust in the Prime Minister saying that he would pay. But he can very well come up with a response as to how he should not pay. And that would create a situation with the ruling. So frankly speaking, I think that the statement by the NNP government is very different to that of the NDC party leader and the decision that they disclosed.
Yes, Mr. Bishop, except Senator Humphrey is saying, though, that he is judging what NDC's intentions are based on their previous record with respect to this issue. What are your thoughts on that thought process?
Well, I see it really as a sort of campaign response there to see that the NDC didn't follow or address the issue. Right? Frankly speaking, let's look at the other issues as it relates to the history of the NDC, and to look at the fact now that the NDC is a group of young politicians that are willing to move this country forward. So you have a new leader with a group of young, enthusiastic persons that are willing to take up the challenge to push this country forward. So you can't compare this young group with the old. You know, let's move forward from where we are. You know, I think that is the way we have to look at it. Frankly.
is what Mr. Bishop is saying. And then we want to segue,
Mr.
gentlemen.
Mr.
We want to
Lalsing,
yes, Senator, quickly, but we want to
Mr.
segue to
Lalsing
another.
raised the question of experience, and that is very important in deciding where you are going to go. And I'm saying to you, you have a new leader who has consistently stood on the side of capital. And it is not me who said it. It is a prominent trade unionist of today who said it, who told the workers, when you go into the ballot box, I want you to think quite carefully where you cast in that ballot. Because I can tell you, in the brewery struggle, when we went late into midnight, after I survived the thing in front of the truck and a lockup in the South St. George police station, and there has not been a time in recent history where a trade unionist, you had to go back to 1951 to find a trade unionist other than myself that was locked up for a workers' issue. Having been locked up, when I went to the negotiating table, the person who I was confronting on behalf of the workers is somebody who has always represented capital, and you are asking the workers now to take a chance on somebody who in all his professional life, this is not a Ruggles Ferguson.
Yes, Senator. Yes,
so
Senator. I get what you're saying. We have to get.
Is important.
Yes, we have to get.
Before. And
yes,
I'm
it was. But Senator, we have to get to the other topic.
Yeah, but I'm saying
yes, we have to get to the other topic. I know we will get to that. We will get to the other topic at this point.
Agreed.
So the other topic has to do with the regularization of temporary workers. That is an issue that the trade unions have been articulating, and they have been advocating for. That the state of temporary workers is creating a situation in the service of fair, but it's also creating a situation in the service where of uncertainty with respect to security of tenure. And so I want to begin with you, Mr. Lalsing, because you probably come with a unique perspective as somebody in the private sector. And then I'll get to Mr. Bishop and Mr. Humphrey on that question. But what are your thoughts with respect to the regularization of temporary workers, casual workers, whether it is the nurses at the hospital, whether it is a lot of the ancillary staff that work in the public service, whether it is a lot of the workers, for example, the Imani workers and other workers who are working on contract within the annals of the public service. Mr. Lalsing.
Yes, I've always said it very clearly, and that in regards to workers, we need to give them confidence. We need to train them, make sure they absorb the training, and we need to put them to perform and give them confidence. I'm distraught when you look at Imanis. You probably have a 25-30% success rate. Nevertheless, the successful trainees are not treated properly. If you are trained, you're performing, I think they should be upgraded, promoted, so that they can be confident of themselves. What the government is doing with workers is really treating them hand to mouth. And I don't think they instilling confidence in those workers. Secondly, they are undermining the private sector, because persons can leave the private sector, go to the Imani, get a temporary amount of money every month, don't perform, but they have dollars. This, in my opinion, is not developing the young minds for productivity in the economic sector. Productivity in the economic sector is far-fetched. We are not getting it. And on the ground, when you speak to people generally, farmers and other business people, they are very annoyed with how the government deal with production. Because you have 5,000-6,000 people are being trained for 10 years. This is ridiculous. We need to regularize it. If you're good, I train you. If you're good performing, upgrade you, make you permanent. If you're not, then they should put you aside and give you further training. But we cannot be treating all the workers at the same level. We have to promote them, we have to give them confidence, and we have to make them succeed. Now, in the private sector, I'm seeing a big problem, all because of the failure of the Imani and the Imani is not a failure, you know. The program is a good one. The problem in the Imani is administration. They are not administrating the program properly, and so it is not allowing the young people to build confidence in life so that they can develop themselves.
Mr. Lansing, you've said a lot there, and Mr. Bishop, I'm going to bring you in on the same question of regularizing of these workers. Now, the New National Party, that's their favorite catchphrase, that is a pie in the sky concept there, that you just can't regularize carte blanche everybody. And it appears that is the approach you're taking. And the question is to Senator Chester Humphrey's point earlier, with respect to how are you going to reconcile regularizing these workers with other commitments, with other recurrent commitments that government has. Your thoughts?
I think that training has to be towards an end. In other words, there's a program in the Caribbean that deals with the CVQ, the Caribbean, whatever the acronym relates to. But that is what should be in supporting Mr. Lalsing. That is what the Imani program ought to be. You can't be a trainee forever and evermore. You know, at some point in time, you have to be regarded as a full-time worker, because as an Imani, you don't get to pay NIS. Your employer don't pay your NIS. You can't go to one of the institutions and make a credit because you are not permanent. So yes, training, but it ought to be for a period of time where you would be made qualified and then made permanent within what institution, and not really continuing forever and evermore. I think that is the sense that the NDC government is trying to say, that these workers should be made permanent. When they think, but the Imani program should be a program whereby at a certain point in time, the workers would move to a different level. And the same has to be done with in the government office. There are quite a lot of workers that are working under contract, and you're not being regularized. So therefore, you're not enjoying the benefit of a permanent worker. And that might even have some implication for your pension at retirement. So these things has to be regularized. That's my view on it.
All right, Senator Humphrey.
Well, Kellon, we are dealing with a very structural problem in the economy here. And that structural problem is one of youth unemployment. And the ability of the economy to absorb so many workers. I heard Mr. Bishop that you must regularize them. They can't be training forever and then you must move them on and make them permanent. My question to him is, where are you going to make them permanent? There's no doubt that the program has some challenges that need to be streamlined and fixed. But the fundamental problem that we are trying to address is that we have low productivity in this economy overall, low employment, high unemployment, high youth unemployment in particular. And that is simply because the world economy has changed within which we find ourselves. We have introduced mass education, both at the primary school. Now we have universal secondary education. We have an old, archaic, dead, existing sector in the economy. We have all the nostalgia for plantation, agriculture, and so on. But in today's world, that cannot survive. It has diminished significantly. The last fatal blow we received to the remnants of the plantation economy is when we lost our favorable trading status on the issue of bananas to the UK. So we are basically trying to address a crisis of international capital in an economy on the periphery. What the government has been attempting to do with the Imani program is to be able to address the question of youth unemployment. But the program alone by itself, unless you grow the economy, you will not resolve this problem. How do you grow the economy? Which path do you take the economy? In the context of today's world, is the service economy a better fit for Grenada? Or is it we try to revitalize the plantation economy that by and large is dead? Because a critical element in that, first of all, is mechanization. You can do limited mechanization. You almost can't. The second element is labor. You don't have the labor market because young people are not going into the agro labor market. You cannot make that happen. Yes, we can produce fruits and vegetables to satisfy a certain segment of the economy and so on. And this is why the service economy of tourism, we have to settle on where Grenada is going to go in terms of the new economy in a new world that is hostile and different and treats every state the same, right? Which is unfair. So I'm saying you have to understand the Imani program in the context of these problems. Simply by saying you will make all Imanis permanent. My question to you, you'll make them permanent where? Which suggests to me that the fundamental problems, you don't understand it. This is a short-term attempt because it's not forever sustainable. Because remember, every year we turn out about approximately maybe 2,500 or probably 3,000 persons enter the labor market every year, but we are not creating 3,500 jobs every year. So we have a problem, right? And quite frankly, I've heard nothing from the National Democratic Congress, which seems to suggest that the Young Turks, without their experience, fully has a grasp on the fundamental character of this problem and the fact that it's a structural problem related to the nature of the economy that we have and the changes that we have to make. And this is why it is reasonable to conclude, and it has happened in 2008, when the National Democratic Congress, of which I was a part, came in. They closed the Imani program down for several months. And I have a very strong feeling that the same thing is going to happen again.
Except Senator, they gave a commitment that they will not be sending the Imani workers home. So I do not know where that strong feeling is coming from.
Well, they gave a commitment that they will remove income tax on severance pay. And they did it partially with a sunset thing, and it died in 1 year. They made a commitment that they'll create 1,000 jobs. But what did they do? They sent 300 workers from CCC home. So what, as I said to you, I am not taken by the old talk. I am taken by their deeds, right?
All right,
and we had 300 workers who were sent home.
Let's bring in Mr. Bishop here. Mr. Bishop, it's Mr. Humphrey just saying that all of those commitments, pronouncements by your political leader and his team is just old talk. What say you?
I see that as a sort of political campaign bashing the leader and the NDC on the issues. Now, this is an election campaign. The NDC wants to be the next government in office. And these are not just
pie. It will say anything to get there.
Yes. Senator, let him finish, please.
Yes, what I'm saying is that the response from the NNP is this is pie in the sky issues. But it can be work. It can happen. Look at the revolution. There was various things that was introduced to generate economic development. And we just can't say things can happen. We can develop our agricultural sector, go into agro industries, set up factories. These are things that we have to do. We cannot just say we find ourselves in a situation in the world and just give up. We have to find a way to exist and to provide jobs for our young people. And I think with that approach, the question of agro-industries, agricultural development, and so on would provide jobs, hundreds of jobs, and also the other activities within the economy. So I'm afraid, Brother Humphrey is really directing a sort of bashing thing against the NDC. But I'm saying again that this is a new NDC with a new leader, right, and a new focus for the development of Grenada, and I think it can happen. This is not a pie in the sky situation. We can create the labor. We can create the employment.
Mr. Larsing, I see you smiling here. You've heard both gentlemen make Senator quickly, and then I'll have to get to Mr. Larsing because
Dr. Bubb.
we do. Yes,
Dr. Bubb.
we
For
do
the
have
first
to close
time in the
program
history of this
for this
country,
segment.
the parish of
Yes.
St. David is seeing development it has never seen before. We started the 6 cent project, and you know what the NDC did? They did a protest camp. Right now, there are over 340 young people working on that project in St. David. The NDC led a protest campaign on some environmental scarium business, protesting against that development. Yes? So when we say it's pie in the sky, we mean, Brother Bishop, how long it will take, how many agro factories form under the Tillman Thomas government, how long it will take, what you're going to feed these factories with. In the meantime, people have to eat. In the meantime, 3,000 students are coming out of school. How are you going to do it?
The PRG took 4.5 years.
But this was in the place of the Cold War. We had tremendous assistance from Cuba and so on. Right now, Cuba needs assistance. Who is going to help us?
Who is going
to help us? Where are you going to get these resources from?
It can't happen.
Gentlemen,
the moon can touch the sun. It can happen.
Yeah, gentlemen, just hold on. Let me get
be realistic, Elliot.
Let's get to Mr. Larsing. Let's get to Mr. Larsing here. Mr. Larsing, quickly, and then we have to close the segment before we get to ASP Simon Douglas of the Royal Grenada Police Force. Mr. Larsing.
We have a fundamental problem in Grenada, educating and training our young people. I believe life skills should be start educating our young people at the age of 5. We are not educating. Parents are failing. The educational system is failing. And you're trying to develop our young people in life skills after they leave the secondary schools. That, to me, is a very backward method. We need to revamp the educational system, and we need to train our young people from the age of 5 in life skills. So when a child leaves secondary school, they are ready to produce. They are ready to enter the job market. They are ready to further their education, but they would have already acquired life skills, know what to expect, know what to do to make life, to be productive, to develop themselves. I just wanted to add that to the overall package in terms of the problem facing young people, the training that they're getting, and I think the training need to continue. So it has to be a phased-in situation. We cannot stop the Imani at this time. You have to give it at least 5 years. But in the meantime, let us start training our people while they are in school, so they get a well-rounded education in terms of practical, academics, and life skills. And we can then build a very productive country.
Absolutely. And gentlemen, at this time, we want to end this segment of the program with some closing comments respecting the time commitments of both Senator Humphrey and Mr. Bishop. And Mr. Bishop, I would give you the floor for some closing comments. We are in the final stretch of this election campaign, and so I would give you an opportunity for some closing comments on your end. As a programming note, we also invited both political leaders for exclusive interviews next week, Sunday. Both Dr. Mitchell, we have extended an invitation to Dr. Mitchell, and we've also extended an invitation to Mr. Deacon Mitchell of the National Democratic Congress. So we will let you know what their responses are, and we would have that opportunity to hear from both leaders on the Bubb Report next week, Sunday, if they do accept our invitation. So, Mr. Bishop, over to you.
I think Mr. Lal Singh has been listening to the NDC rallies, because the question of training from primary level has been expounded over and over, and that has to be done. It's a very important. Also, we'll have to look at the various white elephants we have throughout our country. We have quite a lot of community centers that are closed up on a daily basis, and it's only used for church services or if there is some other meeting. Now, those community centers can be used as training programs for young people in various skills, for young men and young women. So I am very much in favor of that direction. The training ought not to be just to be a lawyer or a doctor. You have to learn to do things and to make yourself employable. And so that is my view on that.
Mr. Bishop, are you there?
Yes,
are you hearing me, sir? Yes. You remind me of one of my professors. That brevity is actually one of your strongest suits. So thank you for that very much. Senator Humphrey, over to you for some closing comments before we get.
As I said, you got to judge them by their past, not by their old talk. Old talk is cheap. And the more I listen to my brother Elliot, who I have a tremendous amount of respect and affection for, I begin to understand them more. And it speaks to the question of the lack of experience. What I would like to say is that the NMP has made a commitment. And that commitment is, beginning this year, any worker who retires this year, with effect from January the 1st, can write the Accountant General for the pension and gratuity, and they shall receive it. For those who retired before the 1st of January this year, measures are now being put in place once the data is in and the committee makes its report of how that will be addressed. Whether they will get all the money in lump sum, whether it will be proportionately, because bearing in mind, while the trade union is collectively representing the worker, the pension is an individual constitutional right. And irrespective of what a trade union agreement is, a worker can pray before the court individually. So that again is another part of the complication. But I wish to repeat that commencing this year, any public officer who is entitled by law and by virtue of the instrument of appointment from the Public Service Commission is entitled to receive his pension, can do that and will get his pension and gratuity this year. And I put my head on a block and I offer Mr. Brother Bishop the scalpel to cut it off. And that's how confirm I am. My head is on the block, Elliot. I give you the scalpel, and I'm telling you, any worker who retired as from the first.
It sounds a lot like a cabinet member there that you so.
No, I am. Elliot, in the same way as I told you, in May of 2013, that the government will remove income tax and severance pay, and it happened. I am telling you now, any worker who have retired can write the Accountant General to receive his pension and gratuity if he retired this year, and he will get it. If he retired last year and going back, it will take a few more weeks because a program is being put together as to how that will be done. So the pension issue for all practical purposes right now is a solvable path. So it's not a promise anymore.
All right,
and that has absolutely nothing to do with what the NDC has said.
All right.
Because prior to this issue, Mrs. Armstrong and others receive all of their money, and they receive it in one payment. And that's a fact that you will not deny, because I know you as an honest and upright comrade.
All right, Senator, thank you so much, gentlemen, both Mr. Bishop and yourself. Mr. Senator Humphrey, I think you guys are heading to St. Andrew, and the NDC is headed to, I believe, St. John, yes, in Guelph. I believe you guys have a rally in Guelph.
Yes.
So all the best to both of you, gentlemen, and I trust that we would continue to keep this campaign respectful and peaceful, bearing in mind that we need to raise the bar of the conversation as well. And these are the types of conversations that we welcome and encourage, of course. And Mr. Lal Singh, I want to give you an opportunity for some closing comments as well. Over to you.
Yeah, thank you very much. But a bishop was saying that I'm listening to the NDC. I published something on Facebook long time ago, Mr. Bishop, about the Imani program and what should really happen. I also produced something on education and what should really happen, because I am in the midst of it when dealing with young people. On the pension issue, I believe that the promise by the NNP should go further. It should not be only the people retiring as of 31st January, but I believe payment of pension should be paid January 31st to all retired people. Of course, the backlog can be worked out over a 5-year period. But I believe if you are retired this month, then as of the end of January 2023, you should be included in the pension payments. Not only the people who are retiring in January, but it should include all persons who have retired before. But you only get month to month. Any backlog, we understood that there must be a worked out detail because of the quantum, and it can be paid over a 5-year period.
Absolutely. Mr. Lal Singh, any expectations as we headed to the home stretch of this election campaign?
Over the last 2 weeks, I've seen a growth in the NDC. They were very much behind, but I've seen a ton of events that they are developing. On the ground, you have a lot more people looking towards them. So they might have a national growth. I am not sure if the growth will be in the various constituencies because it's first past the post. Whether or not that will give them a sufficient win in enough constituencies to provide them to win the elections. But I've always said it, I do not want to see a 50-0 anymore. It is not good for NNP, it is not good for NDC, it is not good for the country, because there is a lack of debate in the parliament. In other words, you really don't need a parliament if all the people are represented by one party. So I hope very much that the NDC can develop themselves, and if they can't win the election, at least they can be a formidable opposition to deal with the debate of issues. And at the same time, because they're a very young group, they can develop their experience in the parliament and get ready for government one of these days.
All right, Mr. Lal Singh, thank you for your contribution to the Bubb Report, and we wish to thank Mr. Elliot Bishop and Senator Chester Humphrey, all of you, and for your valuable contributions to the Bubb Report this morning. And viewers and listeners, the next segment of the Bubb Report comes to you compliments S.A. Johnson Funeral Home, a Caribbean family-owned funeral service. They offer a full range of funeral services at affordable prices in New York City, and they can be reached on 347-777-9797. S.A. Johnson Funeral Home, because you deserve to be treated with dignity. And stand by, folks, we will take a quick break and come back with our second segment of the day.
Thank you very much, Dr. Bubb.
Thank you, Mr. Bishop. Thank you.
Very proud of what you're doing, and I think it's much needed. So thank you so much for your contribution.
Thank you again for watching the Bubb Report. Viewers and listeners, we want to thank you sincerely. Ashley, thank you so very much. Senator Chester Humphrey, welcome to the Bubb Report. Mr. Mitchell, welcome to the program. the Honorable Jumani Williams. We call him Jumani, who is the public advocate for the city of New York. The Honorable Baz Diopande, former Prime Minister of the Republic of Trinidad and Tobago. Mr. Pandey, welcome to the Bubb Report of Grenada. The Honorable Tobias Clement. Mr. Clement, welcome to the Bubb Report. Is it Nicolai or Nikolai? I hope I pronounced it.
Nikolai.
It's Nikolai. Thank you.
Yes.
And welcome to the program, Her Excellency Ambassador Luan Gilchrist. Mr. Randall Robinson, you are here in your private capacity and in your personal capacity. Yesterday, we learned that you were detained by law enforcement in Grenada. So you come from a family of public servants.
Yes, we are a family of public servants.
So you're saying that you have to do more, but my question is, what have you done as President of the Union to ensure that that happens?
To the cards that I have drawn, that I am the minister at this point in time. And for members of the
public. But you're also a servant of the people. Why would we have ambassadors representing the state that do not understand clearly what their terms of reference are? And welcome back, folks. At this point, I wish to welcome to the program ASP Simon Douglas of the Royal Grenada Police Force. ASP Douglas, your department has been embarking on a community education drive, a national education drive with respect to do's and don'ts of elections. So we wish to welcome you on the program to really articulate some of those issues that the police is concerned about. Now, before we get to what that public education program is all about, I want to ask you a question relative to an incident involving members of the National Democratic Congress in the town of St. George. They have indicated that they have been victims of political intimidation in that constituency. Have they reported this issue, and what is the status of that investigation?
Okay, Dr. Bob, thank you very much for having me. It's a pleasure.
Absolutely.
I just wish to clarify this issue. I am not attached to the Community Relations Department. I am responsible for this education drive on the do's and don'ts of elections. And I am not privy to the information regarding such a report.
Okay, so let us talk about the do's and don'ts of elections. One of the things that struck me in looking at the representation of the People's Act with respect to elections is that of alcohol and the regulation of alcohol on election day. So let's start there. Let's talk about that, because that really stood out for me.
Okay. What has been happening, though, if you don't mind?
Yes.
It would be much easier for us both if I'm allowed to present the aspects of the act that we have prepared.
All right.
As we go along.
Certainly, and we would also want to take questions from the audience as well. So we also have to be prepared for that. So please proceed.
Yes. So I would ask that the questions pertain to the aspects of the presentation that is already done, and at the end, any other questions can be asked.
Okay. So
I do not want to attempt to answer a question in relation to something that is down to be presented, and I have to skip pages and come back to it.
All right, so let's go ahead. Let's hear what you have.
I'd like to start off by giving, in a general sense, the responsibility of the police during the election process. It should be the desire of each Grenadian that we have a very smooth and, I would like to say, successful election process. And in an effort to ensure that, the Royal Grenada Police Force accepts the responsibility for preventing disruption of political rallies and meetings, prevention of intimidation and harassment among party supporters, maintaining order and creating, by means of effective policing, a favorable climate in which a democratic election can take place, ensuring and preserving a free, safe, and lawful atmosphere for campaigning by all parties and candidates without discrimination, preventing the destruction of campaign posters. So those generally are the responsibilities of the police during this process. And as I indicated, we gracefully accept that responsibility as we always do. And as
Now,
you
let us,
mentioned,
yes, go ahead.
the rules regarding elections are contained in the Representation of the People Act, Chapter 286A of the 2010 Revised Laws of Grenada. And we are going to speak on some selected sections from that act and endeavor to break them down so that the ordinary man can understand what the law is saying that we should do and should not do. And we start off by letting you know that the taking of the poll shall be at each polling station by secret ballot in accordance with the provisions of this act, the Representation of the People Act. And that is contained in Section 46 of the Act. So every ballot shall be secret ballot. Section 50 tells us that the poll shall be taken between 6 a.m. and 5 p.m. on election day. And I just wish to remind us at this point that we now have 2 election days in every cycle. In this particular instance, they're going to be the 20th of this month for police officers is considered a special polling day, and the 23rd for the rest of the general public. The proceedings at the poll, Section 57 of the Act tells us at Subsection 1, at the hour fixed for opening the poll, the presiding officer and the poll clerk shall, in the presence of the candidates or their agents and such of the electors as are present, open the ballot box and ascertain that there are no ballot papers or other papers therein, after which the ballot box shall be locked and the presiding officer shall keep the key thereof. The box shall be placed on a table in full view of all present and shall be maintained there until the close of the poll. So the law makes it a very open practice, a very open procedure that the box is checked to ensure that it is clear, free of any type of paper, whether ballot paper or any other paper. And that is done in the presence of all who is present. The presiding officer, the candidates, the agents, and so forth. Subsection 2 tells us that immediately after the ballot box is locked, the presiding officer shall call upon the electors to vote. So this inspection of the box will take place just before 6 a.m. so that the voting can start promptly at 6 a.m. The presiding officer shall secure the admittance of every elector into the polling station and shall see that they are not impeded or molested at or about the polling station. So that is a responsibility of the presiding officer to ensure that electors get to vote freely and comfortably. And of course, the presiding officers have at their disposal the police officers who will be on duty at those polling stations. Subsection 4 says that each elector, upon entering the polling station, shall declare his or her name, residence, and occupation. The poll clerk shall then ascertain if the name of the elector appears on the official list of electors used at the polling station. When it has been ascertained that the applicant elector is qualified to vote at the polling station, his or her name, address, and occupation shall be entered in the poll book to be kept by the poll clerk in the form set out as form number 11 in the third schedule, a number corresponding to the consecutive number allotted to the elector on the official list of electors being prefixed to the elector's name in the appropriate column of the poll book, and the elector shall be immediately allowed to vote unless an election officer or a candidate or any agent of a candidate present at the polling station desires that he or she be first sworn. We moved on to who should be admitted at the polling station, or who shall be. Section 58 of the Act says that the presiding officer shall keep order at his or her polling station and shall regulate the number of voters to be admitted at a time and shall exclude all other persons except his or her assistants, the candidates, one agent for each candidate appointed by such candidate in writing in the form set out as form number 12 in the third schedule, and the constables on duty. So this section tells us who is entitled to be in the polling station while the polling takes place.
All right. Before you go on to the next section, I have a question about the security of the ballot boxes.
Yes.
Before the distribution of the ballot boxes on polling day in and of itself, I know that
Right.
currently it is in the custody of the Parliamentary Elections Office.
Correct.
Now, at what point do you receive custody of those ballot boxes for distribution on election day? And of course, the police, we know they're voting a couple of days before. So talk to us, please, about the security of the ballot boxes there, if you can.
I'm not sure on the point at which the boxes are distributed,
Yeah.
but the security of the boxes do not come into question because, as I read earlier, before the boxes get into use as a recipient of the ballots, the boxes are opened and inspected in the presence of the persons at that polling station. So it is clear to everyone that there are no papers also in that box. So even if it is in the possession of the presiding officer 5 days before, the integrity of the box will not be in question because the inspection takes place just before the voting starts. But
Okay.
I cannot specifically answer your question as to when they take possession of those boxes.
All right. So please proceed.
Thank you. Right. Section 63 of the Act deals with immersing of the appropriate digit in electoral ink. And that's something that a lot of people have questions about. It says in subsection 1, the presiding officer shall, before permitting any elector to put his or her folded ballot paper in the ballot box, in accordance with section 61(4), if the elector has an appropriate digit, satisfy himself or herself that there does not appear upon such digit any substance which in his or her opinion is likely to prevent the adhesion of electoral ink and cause the elector to immerse such digit in the electoral ink. The Act speaks specifically to what appropriate digit means, Dr. Bob, but I'll try to summarize it. A person who has a right hand with all their fingers, your right forefinger is considered the appropriate digit. And digits here mean fingers. So the right forefinger will be the appropriate digit. If that hand does not contain the right forefinger, then the next finger in line after the thumb will become the appropriate digit. And it continues in that sequence. If that person is missing all four fingers but has a thumb on the right hand, then that thumb will be used as the appropriate digit. For a person who has no fingers on their right hand or do not have a right hand, the same applies to the left hand. The left forefinger is the appropriate digit, and if that finger is missing, the next finger in line on that hand, following the thumb. If all the fingers are missing but a thumb is present, then the thumb becomes the appropriate digit. So the law is saying here in section 63 that in order to ensure that you have not placed any substance on that finger to prevent the electoral ink from, put it in layman terms, from sticking to your finger, then once that is satisfied, once the presiding officer is satisfied that there is no such substance on that finger, then they will allow that person to dip their finger in that ink. And the purpose of the ink is to ensure or to assist in ensuring that no person gets to vote more than once in any election. There are a lot of people who ask questions as to why they need to put this thing on their finger and it takes so long to come off and so forth. But that is the reason for it. Right?
Okay, before we proceed, we have a question here. Please clarify that electors are not allowed to have cell phones at the polling office and not allowed to take pictures of their voting people.
Yes, that issue is on the list of what we're going to speak on. So if you don't mind, I'll address it later.
Yes,
Thank
yes,
you.
please.
Yes. So having said or explained these few things, we move on to one final point before we move into the offenses, the actual do's and don'ts. And that has to do with custody of the ballot boxes after the voting. And Section 81 of the Act says in subsection 1, forthwith, upon making the return to the writ in accordance with the provisions of Section 74, the returning officer shall cause the ballot boxes used thereat with their locks and keys to be deposited in the custody of the member of the police force in charge of a police station in the constituency, or if there is no police station in the constituency, the police station which the returning officer considers to be nearest to the constituency. So the ballot boxes, after the voting has concluded and the necessary paperwork has also been completed, will be turned over to the police, the officer in charge of the nearest police station, and the keys, the law says the keys to that box also turned over to the police. The practice in recent times, however, has been, and I should add that the boxes are lodged in the police cells and they're locked there. The recent practice has been that the cells are double locked. The key to one lock is kept by the returning officer, and the key to the other lock is kept by the officer in charge of the station. So none of those two persons can have access to those boxes without the other. And that helps to preserve the integrity of the ballot boxes. So we move on to the election offenses contained in Part 7 of the Act. And now to your question, Dr. Bubb. Intoxicating liquor not to be sold or given on polling day. Section 82 of the Act, for those of you who wish to follow, says in subsection 1, no intoxicating liquor shall be sold, offered for sale, or given away at any premises situated in any constituency in which an election is being held, and to which a license issued under the Liquor Dealers License Act, Chapter 174, applies at any time between the opening and the closing of the poll on any polling day. Now, this is telling us that persons who operate shops and bars and the like are restricted from giving to any person for whatever purpose, whether for reward or otherwise, whether selling it to them or giving it to them as a friend or some other form of reward. You are restricted from doing that at any point between 6 a.m. and 5 p.m. on polling day. So the celebrations and so forth will have to wait until after 5 p.m.
Because the polls close at 5.
Close at 5.
Yes, the polls close at 5.
So the law says anytime between the opening and closing of the poll, you're restricted from selling or giving alcohol to any person. And subsection 3 says any person who contravenes any of the provisions of either of the last two preceding sections shall be liable on summary conviction to a fine of $500 or to imprisonment for 6 months. So if you simply give your friend a drink between 6 a.m. and 5 p.m., you can be made to pay a fine of $500 and also go to prison for 6 months. Section 83, this deals with employers being mandated to allow employees time for casting their votes. And it says in subsection 1, every employer shall, on polling day, allow to every elector in his or her employ the prescribed period for voting, and no employer shall make any deduction from the pay or other remuneration of any such elector, or impose upon or exact from him or her any penalty by reason of his or her absence during such period. And that is how sacred the right to vote is being treated by our lawmakers. The employers are not allowed to deduct any pay or any benefit from any employee, because that person had been absent from their job for the purpose of voting. And we have been appealing to employers to be sensitive and be reasonable in relation to this issue. Some persons will require a lot more time than other persons in order to cast their vote. An agreement should be reached in advance as to how the process will unfold, whether the employee will cast their vote before attending work, or in some cases, some persons may be required to attend work and then be relieved in order to go cast their votes. Whichever way it is done, adequate time must be allotted or allowed to enable that person to cast their vote comfortably. So we must consider the commute of that person, whether they have to take public transport. And also we must consider the fact that in some instances, there might be lines at the polling stations where that person may have to cast their votes. Subsection 2 says any employer who directly or indirectly refuses, or by intimidation, undue influence, or in any other way interferes with the granting of any elector in his or her employ of the prescribed period for voting, as in this section provided, shall on summary conviction be liable to a fine not exceeding $5,000, or to imprisonment for a term not exceeding 2 years, or to both such fine and imprisonment. And you will notice that the fine in this instance is, well, the penalty is much more severe than the one for intoxicating liquor. And as I indicated, that is how sacred the right to vote is being treated. We move on to section 85, which deals with use of loudspeakers, etc. And it says in subsection 1, no person shall furnish or supply any loudspeaker, bunting, ensign, standard, or set of colors, or any other flags to any person with intent that it shall be carried, worn, or used on motor cars, trucks, other vehicles, or otherwise in public as political propaganda on polling day, and no person shall, with any such intent, carry, wear, or use on motor cars, trucks, other vehicles, or otherwise in public any such loudspeaker, bunting, ensign, banners, standard, or set of colors, or any other flag on polling day. This one is quite long, but it's simply saying that the use of all those campaign equipment is restricted on polling day. And whereas the polling hours we explained earlier are from 6 a.m. to 5 p.m., polling day starts anytime after midnight on the 19th of June and ends just, well, at midnight on the same day. Sorry, on the 20th.
You mean the 23rd of June?
Well, we're speaking about the special polling day, firstly, which is the 20th.
For the police.
So let me make it clear that all the rules apply the same way on both days. So it does not matter that the 20th is set aside for the police only. All the rules, all the laws apply equally on both days. So anytime after midnight on the 19th and before midnight on the 20th is considered polling day. And anytime during that period, the use of these things are restricted. Right? There's a slight exception in subsection 3. It says nothing contained in subsection 1 or 2 shall be deemed to extend to the furnishing or supplying of any banner bearing only the name of any candidate or only such name preceded by the words vote for.
Vote for.
Yes. Or of any rosette or of any favor bearing the symbol allotted to the candidate or to the use of any such banner on any vehicle. So you can carry a banner, a flag, bearing the name of the candidate, and you're allowed to have in front of that name vote for. Right? So you can have a flag saying vote for Dr. Bob. The colors, the party colors, are restricted, the set of colors, and any other text is not allowed on that flag. And the penalty for this offense is a fine of $1,000 and imprisonment for 1 year. Section 86 speaks to maintenance of order at polling stations. And it says, subject to the provisions of subsection 2, during the hours when the poll is open, during the hours when the poll is open upon election day, no person shall assemble or congregate within 100 yards of any building in which is situated a polling station. So wherever a polling station is situated, persons are not allowed to congregate within a distance of 100 yards from that building. And it is the practice, and this year will be no exception. This time will be no exception. The police will mark that distance out clearly with white paint, so any person can see the distance or the area which they are restricted from assembling. Subsection 2 says this section shall not apply to any elector who are waiting to cast their votes at such polling station and who obey any instructions which may be given by the presiding officer or any member of the police force for the purpose of forming a queue with other electors also so waiting. So you're exempted from that restriction if you're within that area for the purpose of casting your vote. And of course, if you comply with the instructions given by the presiding officer or the police officer on duty, mainly in relation to forming a queue. So you're asked to get in a line, you're required to obey that instruction, and if you fail to obey that instruction, then the presiding officer may cause you to be removed from that area. It also does not apply to any person who may, under the provisions of this act, lawfully enter or remain in such polling stations. Every person who contravenes or fails to comply with any of the provisions of this section shall be guilty of an offense against this section and shall be liable on summary conviction thereof to a fine of $500 and to imprisonment for 6 months. And I may not be reading this in the sections in its entirety. I might be paraphrasing some of them in order to save time. And I see that you're following, you're putting them up. So let's move on to section 95, Dr. Bob. And it deals with certain specific offenses. And it says in subsection 1, every person who A, votes or induces or procures any person to vote at any election, knowing that he or she or such other person is prohibited by the Constitution or this Act or any other law from voting at such election. So if you do any of these, you're guilty of an offense. If you vote in the election when you know that you are restricted from voting or you're prohibited from voting by any law of the country, you commit an offense. And if you cause another person to vote knowing that that person is also restricted or prohibited rather from voting, you also commit an offense. So it therefore means that you and that other person will be committing an offense if you cause them to vote under such circumstances. B, any person before or during an election knowingly publishes a false statement of the withdrawal of a candidate at such election for the purpose of promoting or procuring the election of another candidate commits an offense. So we are told clearly here that we are not allowed to publish any false statement about any candidate stating that they have withdrawn from an election. This is in relation to the right of a candidate to withdraw at any stage from the elections. And a person may maliciously publish information that that person has withdrawn from the elections in order to negatively affect them. That is an offense. C, any person who between the date of notification by the supervisor of elections of the issue by the Governor General of a writ for the purpose of an election and the day after polling at such election, whether in a general election or in a by-election, acts in a disorderly manner with intent to prevent the transaction of the business of a public meeting called for the purpose of promoting the election of a candidate as a member to serve in the House of Representatives, that person commits an offense. So a candidate calls a meeting for the purpose of promoting himself as a candidate, and you behave, anything you do that interrupts him executing that purpose, him carrying on the business that he set out to carry on in that meeting. If you do that, you commit an offense. So for example, there are some persons who, for whatever reason, may run along the crowd in a meeting recklessly, knocking people over and so forth. That can amount to this offense. You make noises that prevent the audience from hearing the message that that person intends to give. That also can amount to that offense because it interferes with that person's ability to conduct the business of the meeting that they set out to do. And any person committing any of these three offenses shall be liable to a fine of $1,000 and imprisonment for 6 months. So the fine plus the imprisonment. Subsection 3, every person who between the date of notification by the supervisor of elections of the issue by the Governor General of a writ for the purposes of an election and the day after polling at such election, whether in a general election or in a by-election, incites, combines, or conspires with others to act in a disorderly manner with intent to prevent the transaction of the business of a public meeting called for the purpose of promoting the election of a candidate as a member to serve in the House of Representatives shall be guilty of an offense of illegal practice and shall on conviction, on indictment thereof, be liable to imprisonment for 2 years or to a fine of $2,000 or to both such fine and imprisonment. And that person shall also be incapable during a period of 5 years from the date of conviction of being registered as an elector or of voting at any election. So the first section or the previous section speaks to an individual behaving in a manner that interferes with the business of a meeting. This section speaks to a combination of persons, a group of persons, whether they agree to act together or one is inciting the others or other to behave in that manner. And this offense is an indictable offense. So it's going to be tried at the High Court. and the penalty is $2,000 or imprisonment for 2 years. Subsection 4, any person who before or during an election, for the purpose of affecting the return of any candidate or prospective candidate at such election, knowingly makes or publishes any false statement in relation to the personal character or conduct of such candidate or prospective candidate shall be guilty of illegal practice and shall be liable on summary conviction thereof to a fine not exceeding $500 and imprisonment not exceeding 1 year. This one is simply saying that if you make or publish any statement about a candidate which is false for the purpose of affecting his chances of getting elected, you're guilty of this offense. And we move now to Section 96, a list of special offenses, and that's in relation to ballot papers. Yes? And again, I'm not going to read it exactly as it is. I'm going to try to make it simpler for the persons who are listening. It says in A, every person who forges or counterfeits or fraudulently defaces or destroys any ballot paper is guilty of an offense. So if you produce a replica of a ballot paper, or you destroy a ballot paper, or you deface, and defacing can take place by adding any substance to the face of the document, ink, paint, anything of that sort that makes it have a different appearance from it was originally, you're guilty of an offense. B, any person who, without due authority, supplies a ballot paper to any person. So if you are not authorized by law to give someone a ballot paper and you do that, whatever means you came by that ballot paper, you're guilty of an offense. C, any person who fraudulently puts into any ballot box any paper other than the ballot paper which he or she is authorized by law to put in is guilty of an offense. So if you, for whatever reason, some persons may just be trying to make fun and put some other paper into the ballot box, that constitutes an offense under this section. D, any person who fraudulently takes out of the polling station any ballot paper. So if you take a ballot paper out of the polling station that you don't have any right to do, then you're guilty of an offense. E, any person who without due authority destroys, takes, opens, or otherwise interferes with any ballot box or packet of ballot papers then in use for the purpose of any election commits an offense. So the ballot boxes, and I like to put it this way, the only contact that you must have with the ballot box is when you place your marked ballot paper into that box. You're not allowed to touch it, you're not allowed to move it. Far worse to take it out of the polling station. And the same goes for the packets of ballot papers that are there for the purpose of allowing persons to cast their votes. F, any person not being duly registered as an elector votes at an election. So if you know that you're not registered and you succeed at voting, you're guilty of an offense. And the question that was asked by the listener, we now move on to that. You will not find it here, Dr. Bob. It's in the 2018 amendment to the representation.
Okay, so that's in the 2018. All right. So
Yes.
so that is in the amended version. Okay.
Yes. So we got up to F, and 2018 created a G under Section 96, right? And it says any person who uses a cellular phone, digital camera, or any other electronic device to record, photograph, or otherwise capture and publish the image of a marked ballot paper on polling day is guilty of an offense. So let's take it again. If you use a cellular phone, a digital camera, or any electronic device to record, so you may do a video, photograph, still picture, or in any other way capture, and you publish the image of your marked ballot paper or any other person's marked ballot paper, you're guilty of an offense under this section. And the penalty for offenses under this section, if that person is a returning officer or presiding officer or clerk employed at the polling station, to imprisonment for 1 year or to a fine of $480. So the offense can be committed by the persons employed at the polling station, and if he or she is any other person, to imprisonment for 6 months or to a fine of $240. And of course, it can be both. Also in that 2018 amendment, there's a new section, 96G, and it says, subject to subsection 2, no person shall have in his or her possession any electronic device upon entering a polling booth to cast his or her ballot on polling day. I'll take it again. Subject to subsection 2, no person shall have in his or her possession any electronic device upon entering a polling booth to cast his or her ballot on polling day. The polling booth here is that small secluded area where you go individually to cast your vote.
And you cast that vote, yes.
Yes. All right. And subsection 2 says a person who has an electronic device in his or her possession shall, upon entering the polling station on polling day, hand over the electronic device to the returning officer or his or her designate. So we are not restricted from going to the polling station with our device, but on entering there, the law says that we must hand it over to the presiding officer or any person who they delegate to accept it. So I like cautioning persons that you should not wait until you're asked whether you're carrying a device. It is your responsibility. The law places that responsibility on all of us, that as we enter the polling station, we must hand over that device. We may be given a reminder, but if it is not given, we must remember that that is our responsibility. And subsection 3 says that after the person has cast his or her ballot, the returning officer or his or her designate shall return the electronic device to the person. So you get inside, you hand it over, you cast your vote, and it is returned to you. So Dr. Bob, those are the list of offenses that I wish to raise. And
all right.
If there are any questions on those or anything along those lines,
absolutely. And I know that this was a lot of dense information, but to you viewers and listeners, please ensure that you are that list of offenses there, the list of regulations with respect to how elections are conducted, that is available on the website of the Parliamentary Elections Office. Is that correct,
yes.
ASP
I
Douglas?
believe it is correct, yes.
And where else can we access that information? Does the RGPF have a particular portal of its own where citizens can also access that information?
I am not aware that we have any. But of course, if someone walks into a police station and seeks assistance with what the law says on anything, the police will be more willing to assist.
Absolutely. And
Yes.
audience, I know that you have some questions, so we will definitely try to accommodate as much of your questions as possible. And to the extent to which the ASP is able to answer those questions, of course, for civic understanding, the police enforce. You are not lawmakers. You do not interpret the law. That's for the judicial branch of government to do. The legislative branch makes the law, and you enforce the law. So I just want to put that caveat out there.
You're very much on point with that.
I just want to put that caveat out there as we get to some of those questions. that you would have in the audience. And so we would definitely get to some of those questions that were asked. And so I would begin, let's see. What is the procedure for the boxes after the police have voted? Are the ballots counted or are they put into storage?
I would not want to give an answer and be wrong, but I'll tell you what I recall.
Yes.
Is that all counting takes place on the same day.
Okay.
So no counting takes place.
Which would be the substantive polling day on the 23rd in this case?
The 23rd.
Okay. Okay. So that those ballot boxes remain unopened. They remain unopened until that day.
Locked.
All right.
So the boxes will be locked, and also they will be locked in the police cells.
Mm-hmm. In the police
and as I
cells
indicated
as well.
earlier, the presiding officer keeps one of the keys. So there are two locks.
Okay.
One of the keys is kept by the presiding officer. So no one can access those boxes without that presiding officer being present.
Okay. All right. Bob Marisho is asking, what procedures are in place to avoid tampering and storage of the boxes after voting? And I believe you addressed this, but just in case, yes.
So the boxes are we should remember that the candidates and their agents are entitled to be at those polling stations throughout the process.
Mm-hmm.
All right, they're not allowed to be there together for more than 5 minutes at a time, but they can interchange, they can come and go. But at least one of them is entitled to be there throughout the process. So they'll witness the entire process. And the boxes are picked up at the polling station by the police and escorted by the police and the presiding officer to the police cells.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
So
and
there's
there was another
for
go ahead.
any interference with that. Yes. And,
okay.
and be mindful that they're locked.
Right.
Yes.
Okay. And of course, this viewer, Chanel Ferre, was asking about cell phones, which you addressed, and you spoke of the updates, I believe, to the RPA that I did not have access to that updated legislation, but I will definitely do some homework there on that score. But I believe you addressed that as well. So Chanel Ferre, I hope that the ASP was able to address that question for you. All right. And Corporal Knott is saying, this act is clearly archaic and is a relic of a time gone by. How practical is it to monitor and police infringements of the act, especially regarding alcohol sale and consumption? Now, ASP, that's an interesting question here. How does the police enforce? Of course, the police has a ubiquitous presence on election day, so we appreciate that. But enforcement of that particular regulation there, this viewer is saying that perhaps it might be very difficult to enforce that. Your thoughts?
Well, as with any other law, it is virtually impossible to police them 100%. So persons have to be careful not to get caught, because you do not know when the police will arrive in your area. For whatever reason, they may show up there. So you may not have seen
for a drink at the shop
for 5 days.
Yes.
And for some reason, they show up on election day. So the idea here is that we should abide by the law. We shouldn't have to depend on the police to cause us to obey the law. We should be good citizens and abide by the law. Mm-hmm. But of course, the answer to the question is that there's no way we can police the laws or the rules 100%.
Mm-hmm. Another viewer is asking about the ballot boxes from Carriacou and PT Martinique. How is it transported from the sister islands, and where are those ballots kept?
I do not have the answer to that as to how it is transported. But the same procedure would apply in Carriacou and PT Martinique as on the mainland in terms of the security of the boxes in the police cells. As to the transportation from there to the mainland, I do not have the answer.
What is the appropriate mark to put on the ballot paper? Is it an X or a tick? I believe any marking is appropriate. Is that as
It is
I
an
read
X.
the law? It's an X. It has to be an X.
It is an X, yes.
Okay, so it has to be an X there. Neo, it's
Just
saying
before
that
you
it has
move
to
on,
be.
the presiding
Yes.
officer will give instructions when you get there as to what you should do with that paper. And they would tell you that you make an X.
Okay. All right. Let us get to some other viewer questions. Let's see here. We have a comment, somebody saying they're learning so much about this election. So ASP, credit to you for educating the public there. Let's see here.
Thank you very much. Credit to the RGPF.
Absolutely. Let's see here. I would like to know who carries out these punishment, and has it even happened at any election? So of course the police, you would do the charging, and then I'm sure the courts make the decision of to presume innocence or guilt. That is how the
Certainly.
system works.
Mhm.
Yeah. Let's see. Let's see what other questions we have here. I'm looking for questions that that can be directed to the ASP as we have him here. Good question. David Moraine is asking, is there a penalty for people campaigning on social media on election day?
Yes,
I'm wondering if the law caught up to that.
Yes, the law speaks to use of certain things for those purposes on election day. So by whatever means you use it. That is my understanding of it. By whatever means you use it, you can be guilty of an offense.
Okay. I believe there was another question here that I saw, that there's a lot of questions, so viewers and listeners, please bear with me. And it's about bribery. I believe the viewer was asking about bribery. Let's see here. Let me go back to the top. Right. So the viewer is asking, I would like the ASP to explain what is considered to be bribery in an election. Example, we've seen both parties, by the way, both the NNP and the NDC, have had foreign artists perform at rallies. And we know of a situation that happened in Dominica, a case that ended up in the CCJ with respect to inviting foreign artists to appear at campaign rallies, and whether that constitutes as bribery.
Okay.
Let us talk about what the statute says with respect to bribery.
Okay. Before I do that, let me just give a brief, attempt to give a brief understanding of what took place with that case in Dominica.
Yes.
The substantive issue has not been heard as to whether the persons who were charged were found guilty or not of the offense. The issue that ended up at the CCJ is whether or not the magistrate had the authority to summon them to court to answer that charge. All right. So the CCJ decided that the magistrate does have that authority. And so the case now has to be heard by the magistrate to make a determination whether or not the persons were guilty of the offense. Right.
So, yes, if you can just recall the bribery statute in the RPA.
Those are contained, for those of you who may wish to read it. I will not read, I'll just try to paraphrase them. Treating bribery, etc., sections 89, 92.
So I'm seeing here it's section 92, 88,
89, and 92.
92, right? That's right, yes.
But treating and bribery are largely similar offenses. They deal with giving somebody something in order to get that person to vote for you or some other person that you wish them to vote for. But in relation to the issue of treating, the law says that you must corruptly give that thing to the person. And that is the aspect of the offense that will not be very simple to prove. So it might be very easy to prove that, and you mentioned the foreign artists, that falls under entertainment. It will be very easy to prove that entertainment was provided. And yes, a court may conclude that the purpose of it was to encourage persons to vote in a particular way. But in addition to those, the prosecution must prove that that was done corruptly. And I think that's the part that a lot of persons who discuss this issue are missing. So I anxiously await a decision of the court in Dominica as to whether, in fact, those persons are guilty of the offense. And of course, if they're found guilty, then it will be a precedence that will apply to us.
And every person who is guilty of bribery, treating, or undue influence under the provisions of this act shall, on summary conviction thereof, be liable to imprisonment for 2 years, or to a fine not exceeding $2,400 or both.
Yes.
Such imprisonment and fine. All right, let us get to some other viewer questions. Someone is asking, are you guys using the media to explain all the restrictions and laws on election day so folks can properly be informed? Because ignorance of the law is no excuse. And I believe that is why the assistant superintendent is here. This is a media platform, and I believe they have also been appearing on other platforms as well, as I understand it, to explain those rules. So
yes, we have
Mr.
done
Gustin,
that throughout last week and the previous week.
Mhm.
The week prior to that, we have been doing so.
Okay,
And we've been to
absolutely.
several radio stations and television stations on multiple occasions.
Okay. All right. So we have that. Let's see here. How does enforcing these rules go? And who lays the charge?
Okay.
I think that one is self-explanatory. I mean, the police has to. Now, the returning officers, do the returning officers have a particular special responsibilities at the respective polling stations to ensure that electors who come into the polling stations, I keep saying police station, the polling stations, that they are on the lookout for any irregularities that might be in contravention of any of the regulations?
Certainly. First of all, the presiding officer is the person in charge of the polling station. And they have the authority to give certain directives, certain instructions to the police. And it is their responsibility to ensure that all the laws, all the rules are abided by. In fact, there are some offenses for presiding officers not ensuring that persons comply with all the rules. So certainly that is their duty, that is their responsibility, to ensure that all the rules are complied with.
All right, I think those are some of the substantive questions, and a number of other questions related to the interpretation of the law, and that's not what you do. And so if we had an attorney on here, of course, the attorney would be able to interpret these statutes, but your arm of government is to enforce the law. So ASP Douglas, we thank you for your appearance on the program and for articulating what the law says with respect to what citizens should be aware of on election day. So I would give you an opportunity for some closing comments, and I will be following up with the community relations on that Town of St. George incident involving Claudette Joseph and the NDC there. But I would give you an opportunity for some closing comments.
Yes. Thank you very much. What I would like to say to us, again, it should be in the interest of all Grenadians to see that we have a very smooth flowing, successful election 2022. And we can only do that by being responsible and respecting everyone else, respecting the views, the opinions, the choices, the preferences of every other person. And if we do that, then we will have a very smooth elections 2022. And that is, I hope, the desire of every Grenadian. Thank you very much for having me.
Absolutely, ASP Douglas, and we thank the RGPF for educating the national community on these very pertinent issues. Viewers and listeners, that was Assistant Superintendent Simon Douglas of the Royal Grenada Police Force, who has been able to articulate some of the key rules and regulations that the Grenadian community has to be aware of as the country leads up into another election. Remember, polling day is on June 23rd and June 20th for members of the Royal Grenada Police Force and law enforcement in Grenada. Of course, as a programming note, we invited the political leaders of both political parties to appear on the Bubb Report next week. We are hoping that both of them respond. One of our contacts on the NNP side of the ledger indicated that our request was sent to both Ms. Emmeline Pear, who is the Public Relations Officer of the New National Party, who has been always responsive to any questions that I ask, any requests that I make, whether or not those responses are favorable or not. I respect the fact that she does in fact respond when we do make requests. The other request was sent to the Prime Minister's press secretary. I am not hoping to get a response from that office, but it is what it is. We also sent a request to the public relations arm of the National Democratic Congress. I've spoken to one of their contacts last evening, and we await a response to ensure that we can have both representatives of either party here next week, Sunday, as we lead into a polling day on June 23rd. And viewers and listeners, I want to thank you for the opportunity for being a part of this program today, and thank our earlier guests for their participation on the Bubb Report. And of course, we thank you for viewing, and we would see you next week, Sunday. Bye-bye.